Fadl, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you got to listen into that conversation. The continent really has an opportunity through its education system to spearhead the qualification of a lot of the skills required globally. Speak to me about Nexford's focus, where they will be contributing towards this need.
Thank you for having me today. Indeed, our focus is really on bridging the gap between what industry needs and what higher education is actually providing, and doing that in an affordable way. So ultimately, what we aim to deliver is a platform that will allow folks to get the education that they need in order to access what we think of as the global grid, which is essentially the virtual or the remote job market all across the world. So by equipping people with the skills that they need, we want to get them on this global grid, regardless of their location, their gender, their race, or their socioeconomic background. And that's really aimed to tackle unemployment across Africa.
It is a good time to be in the education space because technology has really changed how you go about doing that. But how are you approaching one of the biggest challenges, which is the accreditation or the credibility of the degrees that are coming out and their acceptance by leading organizations across the globe? Is that not one of your biggest challenges?
It is a big challenge as a startup. So by definition, as a startup, you're spending a lot of time building brand and establishing brand credibility. So we're going through a number of long processes. Being based in Washington, D.C., we are an American university ourselves. And as a licensed American university, that gives us a certain amount of credibility. And we're working on multiple different levels of accreditation in the U.S. to establish that brand credibility. Having said that, I think the market is evolving a little bit and almost gravitating a little bit more towards employers. So ultimately, whether it's accreditation or any other form of regulatory approval, these are all a means to an end, in my view, in the sense that learners are coming to get an education in order to get a job. So if employers are hiring graduates and are signaling to the market that they're looking for folks with specific skills that Nexford is able to provide, then that helps achieve the same goal of building that credibility. And last but definitely not least, I would say, is the alumni network and our learner community across the world. In the sort of social media-led world, folks look to get feedback and get firsthand recommendations from peers. So peer-to-peer referrals are as powerful, if not even more powerful than accreditation, I would say, going forward.
Here's one more powerful problem, and possibly now we have solutions to it, and that is the ability for these qualifications to enable the graduates to hit the road running, to add value to organization almost immediately. Are you focusing on this as well? Because organizations can no longer wait years before somebody is able to add a tremendous amount of value. Time is just too tight. How are you solving for that?
Indeed, that's actually precisely our focus in what we call, education to employment pathways. So everything we do is really focused on providing folks with education that they can apply. So it's practical skills that they're learning that they can apply immediately. We're actually just about to launch new pathway programs right now focused on the banking sector, for instance, to solve this specific challenge, the challenge of, job readiness from day one. Employers today are also facing a new challenge, which is churn. So there's a very high level of churn across employees, partially due to remote jobs. So foreign companies are poaching qualified employees, whether it be in South Africa or Nigeria or Kenya. So how can organizations, retain employees better, but also hire more job-ready employees from day one? So what we're doing is we're partnering with employers to analyze what their needs are and integrate those into our curricula so learners graduate being job ready from day one.
And I'm interested, and I always ask the question, sectors. Which sectors are you specifically targeting? And why those sectors, considering that we literally are entering into a completely new global era when it comes to the need that the market wants from students and from graduates?
You're right. So, people have been talking about the new era, the third industrial revolution and the fourth and eventually the fifth. And I think to an extent, people have been talking about new eras for quite a while now. So we try to focus on education that will provide you with the infrastructure and essentially teach you how to learn. So we think learning how to learn is really the most important skill you need to master. Having said that, we started with focusing on the business sector specifically, with a number of different specializations, such as product management, e-commerce, artificial intelligence, and then now we've just recently launched other shorter programs in areas like software engineering and cybersecurity and others. So it's really the intersection of business and technology is where we're focused on predominantly. And why? Because that's where there's the greatest demand, both on the continent as well as globally.
We probably will be making the more traditional universities a little bit obsolete in the future, but I hope I'm around to see which universities and the approaches are actually going to provide the greatest value to the market. Fadl, if you could also speak to the mobility. How is the mobility and the openness to people being able, one, to work from anywhere and work for any institution on the globe, as well as the ability to move and to work in different places? Because it seems we're also dealing with a generation that's very much more mobile than the previous generations.
Yeah, definitely. It's much more mobile. And this notion of both social and economic mobility, it can mean physical mobility or virtual mobility. For us as a mission-driven organization, we're really trying to focus on making essentially brain drain, if you will, an option. Immigration should be an option rather than a necessity. So again, whether you're in South Africa or Egypt or Nigeria or Kenya, you should have the option to immigrate or stay home. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is empower youth to get the skills that they need and still be able to access remote jobs regardless of their physical location. I think software engineering is a great example. In other areas, something like sales enablement or business analytics, these are all great examples of areas where companies across the world are hiring remotely. And you don't need to be physically located, whether in the US or in the UK. So you can be a great software engineer based in South Africa, working for a company in Texas, making 3 times what the average South African software engineer would be making. So from an economic impact perspective, that's much more powerful for the South African economy. Being able to stay home and get that income while you're home and share knowledge with your peers and essentially create a circle of knowledge around you is much more impactful, and that's what we're trying to achieve.